Finding your ideal audio interface can be super overwhelming because there's hundreds of options out on the market, and it leads you to the question, what am I supposed to buy? This video is going to break down the whole thought process of selecting an audio interface and help you define your own needs for yourself. I have probably owned over 25 different audio interfaces throughout the course of my music production journey, and I've loved some and I've really not loved some, and my hope is that this video will help you not have to buy that many to find the one you really like. Because once you find that interface that kind of ties your whole studio together, it really is a game changer, and I want that for you. So real quick, in case you're totally new to the game, an audio interface is basically a middleman that connects all of your physical devices such as guitars, keyboards, microphones, anything like that, and connects it to your computer so that you can record in a program like Logic or Pro Tools or Cubase, if that's what you're into. It also allows sound to come out and go to a place. So an example is if you're plugging in a studio monitor or running a pair of headphones, your audio interface will help tie all of that together. If one or two of those things sounds like you probably do need an audio interface. The first factor is price. Price is really important because that's kind of the bottom line for a lot of people. Maybe your budget's $300, maybe it's $500, maybe it's $2,000, maybe you have a pro studio. There's lots of things to consider in that regard, especially, are you earning money from it? Is this going to provide an immediate return and improvement to your clients? Or are you just making music for fun, which is totally fine, but you're not expecting that ROI on what you're purchasing. So figure out kind of the ballpark you want to spend on your interface, because that's going to help you eliminate the bulk of the options right away. So although price is a really important factor, sometimes you'll just come across things that are on your needs. You know, you need so many inputs or whatever, but it's out of your price range. So although price is really important, I wouldn't consider price a deal breaker. I'd say, you know, have a range in mind that you want to spend on an interface, but be okay if it is a little above or below that. Once you find out kind of the complete scope of what you need, that might push your budget a little ways. So probably the most important thing to consider is how many physical inputs you need on your interface. So on my primary interface here, the SSL12, it does have 4 physical inputs, and that's kind of the sweet spot for me. I never want less than 4 for most situations. Other options like this More Hub by Xvive has 2 physical inputs, or if you want to go crazy, you can get something like the Scarlett 18i12 that has 8 physical inputs on board. And when I say physical inputs, I mean preamps, like spots for cables, like physical line-ins on the device. Because a lot of times these devices can expand and tie in other methods of input to get to a higher channel count, but I'm talking about how many, on the device you have in your hand, how many inputs do you have? So figure that out. You know, if you are more okay plugging stuff, unplugging stuff, patching stuff during your workflow, then you might not need as high of a channel count. Or if you're doing something like drums where you're like minimum 8 channels and they're in all the time, then you might need a higher channel count. Also look into what are you plugging in. So, you know, you have 4 plugs on this. I think all the interfaces I have that combo jack that'll take XLR or 1/4 inch, but sometimes you'll have a situation like on the front of mine here where I have dedicated instrument inputs, and those are only 1/4 inch. So just take a look at it. You know, if you're someone who records a lot of guitars and you want all those to be plugged in, you need to make sure you have 1/4 inch inputs on yours. Or if you're doing a lot of microphones, you'll need XLR. Other things to consider are like line inputs for keyboards or external gear. So if you have a preamp or compressor you really like using, you might need a different kind of line for that. You also want to look at the total input capacity of your interface. So the SSL12, for example, is called 12 because it has 12 total inputs. You only have 4 preamp channels on board, but you can expand with ADAT to add in 12 total. Things like the Xvive is, I want to say, a 24 channel interface, so you can really expand on this one and get it to be a whole ecosystem. And the Scarlett 18i20 is something that's 18. Usually they'll say it in the name, and then this Tascam Portacapture X8 is 8. So depending on what you have currently as far as like what you need to plug in physically, and then if you want to expand, like what's the total channel count that interface can support. So that's definitely the primary consideration for me, because all the other points I'm going to mention are important, but nothing caps you out harder than not having enough inputs. So after inputs, I like to consider the outputs that are on board, and some considerations for that. Definitely make sure you have at least 2 channels for monitors if you want that, 2 outputs for monitors, and at least 1 headphone. I personally like 2 headphones because I'm usually working with myself and an artist or talent or someone else. I'm collaborating in some way, and I like having the option for 2 headphone jacks. And then if you're in a situation where you're maybe using multiple monitors, like you have your mains and then you have some crappy sounding ones you like to reference off of, that would also be a consideration. You need to make sure you have 4 line outputs to accommodate that. And then just think through if you need any other kinds of outputs. If you're live performing and need backing tracks, you might want more like 4 or 8 outputs. Or if you're doing some sort of immersive mixing or sending a lot of audio to outboard gear, those would all be good situations where you'd want some more outputs. You can usually find the outputs pretty easily on the back of a piece of gear, or if you're looking through the specs, it'll say what kind of outputs it has. The Focusrite has a ton of different outputs on the back. And one final thing to consider on headphones, just because it has 2 plugs for headphones doesn't mean it's 2 volume controls or 2 mixes for headphones. An example here is my SSL12 interface has 2 different knobs for headphones and 2 separate configurable mixes for headphones, and 2 jacks, of course. But this X5, although it has 2 plugs for headphones, an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch, it's not meant for 2 people. It's only the single headphone volume. And so that's just something to consider. You can probably get away with that, plugging 2 headphones in, but you won't have separate mixes and you won't be able to configure that separately. The next thing you'll want to check is what kind of host connection the interface has. And host connection means basically what kind of cable goes from your interface to your computer. I highly recommend just getting something that will plug directly into a port on your computer. Some interfaces can get a little finicky or weird if they're going through an adapter. So I think everything I have is USB-C, and a lot of stuff on the market now is USB-C. And a lot of times if it's a USB-C device, they will just include a USB to Type A plug. So definitely just try to match, side to side what kind of host connection you have. So the next thing that's worth considering is expandability, which is your interface's ability to add in other types of equipment and kind of make an ecosystem. Now I'll keep using my SSL12 for example, because this is the heart of my studio, but I almost maxed this thing out. It has ADAT in, which takes optical signal, so this brings an additional 8 channels of audio into my SSL12. So I'm able to simultaneously record 12 tracks instead of just 4. Under my umbrella of expandability, ADAT is not the only option. So on this X5 More U interface, for example, you have a daisy chain via XLR. So you just connect this up and it sends 2 channels of audio and ties it all together. So ADAT is just one of the ways that you can expand. The Scarlett 18i20 probably has the most expandability options because you can send 8 channels of ADAT out and in. So you can increase the inputs and outputs that this has. And you also have ports like SPDIF and MIDI to consider. So just look at your studio and figure out kind of what connections you have, what you need to physically plug in, and then think through like, are you going to want to expand? So say you record with 2 microphones and a stereo keyboard right now. So you have 4. But in the future, are you going to get another keyboard? Are you going to get a guitar effects pedal that you need to input? Are you going to add some more mics? So think through future proofing, and expandability will definitely increase your price, but I'd say it's slightly more cost effective to just get something that has room to grow than if you buy a new interface every year because you have exceeded its capabilities. Okay, moving along, you're going to want to look at the controls and software of a device. So I basically put this into 3 categories. The first category is standalone, and this means they don't need any external software in your computer to work and function. So the X5 More U Hub is my example of standalone because the whole mix configuration, everything you hear and how it works is all built in, and you don't have to worry about dealing with a third-party software. This option is generally easier because you don't have to wrap your head around something else, and then it's one less thing you have to worry about. The downside is it does get to be a little limiting because you can't do all the crazy stuff that you can do with like a UAD interface. So that's the first thing. The second, and I don't have one with me, is some sort of, like, I consider them full software interfaces, where it's more, I think of like UAD or Antelope Audio for this situation, because you definitely need the onboard software. Some instances you can work without it, but it's meant to be used in tandem. And then a lot of times these will have a lot of DSP or kind of extra stuff where you can run plugins in real time and all of that. I'd classify that as kind of the higher tech option, or the, you know, really software dependent. And those can be great because they're generally the most flexible. You can do the most cool and different stuff with it, but they take a little bit more learning and figuring out to get the hang of. The third category is kind of your hybrid situation. So I feel like most interfaces fall into this category. That'd be, you know, the SSL12, the Scarlett 18i20. Those type of interfaces use a software, but you can definitely plug and play without the software. And that's kind of the sweet spot for me, because I don't always want to deal with the software, but sometimes I get in situations where I need to get really tweaky and customize mixes and all of that. So I would look into that. They don't often say outright on the product page if, you know, something is really hardware dependent or not, but just do a little digging, do a little research, and you'll figure out if the interface you're interested in has certain capabilities or does not have those capabilities. Okay, other considerations. These are not deal breakers. They are more good things to think about, cool features, stuff like that. One thing to think about is, can it record without a computer? So on this Tascam Portacapture X8, I don't need a computer to record with this. 8 channels of audio direct to an SD card. I don't need a computer, but it is still an audio interface. It can connect to a computer and work as an audio interface. So something like that is worth considering if you're doing a lot of field recording or Foley or like location type stuff. The ability to record without a computer is huge for that. Okay, my next point. This is a trigger warning, but conversion. We have to talk about conversion. That's basically the rate and quality that analog goes to digital and digital goes back to analog within the interface. Some people will say that conversion is really important. Other people don't care as much. I will say it's somewhere in the middle, honestly. I guess let's look at it this way. Conversion won't help you if you're out of physical inputs. If you're recording 16 channels worth of drums on your 4-channel interface, conversion's not going to do you any favors there. It's not going to get you out of that pickle. Other things to think about, conversion won't help if your artist doesn't have their own headphone mix. Conversion's not going to help if you're recording on a bunch of $99 microphones. Conversion is a thing, and the higher conversion rate you can get to is better, but a lot of times there's a law of diminishing returns with that, where, you know, a 4-channel interface with decent conversion is going to be $500, and then to get like a little bit better conversion, suddenly you're at $1,000. And it begs the question, like, was that $500 jump worth the slight improvement that I can maybe hear sometimes? So if you're an audiophile type person, definitely prioritize conversion and spend to get better conversion. But I think generally, a lot of products on the market, especially in that mid-range, like Focusrite, SSL, the conversion's already good. You don't have to worry about it too much. Does it have a Talkback? A Talkback microphone can be used to speak with everyone in the ecosystem. A lot of interfaces now have a Talkback built in, and I love it. So the SSL12 has a little talk button right here, and there's a mic right on the surface here that will let you just speak to everyone. So definitely, if Talkback is important to you, if communicating with the talent in a nice, easy way is important to you, then consider something with a Talkback for sure. Physical knobs. This makes me sound like an old person, but I like physical knobs on a device. I love the clean, sleek look of those interfaces that just have like the one knob kind of thing, but just ask yourself if that's important to you. Do you prefer the clean aesthetic, or do you like something like this Scarlett that just has a bunch of knobs all the way across? That's definitely worth considering. It's not a deal breaker. Like, I'm not going to buy an interface because it doesn't have enough knobs, but if I had an identical interface and one of them had more knobs, I might be into that. If you are a avid Shure SM7B user, or someone that uses those gain-hungry mics, you're going to want to look at the overall gain that the preamps in your interface can provide. You're going to want somewhere between 60 and 70 decibels of gain in that interface in order to power your hungry microphones. If you're doing like drum recordings, again, not a big deal. If you're doing a lot of like condenser microphone stuff, not a big deal. It's those quiet, low gain microphones for like vocals and quiet sources that you might want to consider that extra headroom for. So if you are like a podcaster and your whole setup is a bunch of Shure SM7Bs, definitely make sure that that interface has enough gain, you know, again, 60 to 70 decibels of gain. My note for this next part is, do I already have an interface? And I don't mean like, oh yeah, I own an interface. I mean like, a lot of guitar pedals have an interface built in. So if you're a Line 6 Helix user or like a Kemper person, you might actually already have an interface and not know about it. So I wanted to slip that into this video. If you have a lot of other gear, just do a quick Google search and see, you might already have an interface and not need to buy anything. Okay, I'm getting more and more nitpicky as this goes, but look at the physical space that your interface takes up, because part of the reason I got this is because, bear with me, when my keyboard is out over here, it slides just perfectly in this space over here. I'm not even kidding. I measured and had physical size specs that I needed for that interface. So that's another thing to consider if it needs to fit in a certain spot, or if you're traveling with it, you know, doing mobile recording at a location, will it fit in your bag? Like, I don't have a lot of bags that this would fit inside. So if you are traveling, maybe a Focusrite, big old Focusrite isn't the move for you. But if you want something racked, you know, that would work great. Tiny little extras and goodies that the interface has. If it has a pad, that's a win. Like a 20 dB pad to knock down the input of a really hot sound source, that's great, that's a win. High pass filter, that's gold. That's actually like a deal breaker for me. If it doesn't have the little high pass filter button, that's hard for me. I really like rolling off the low end on things coming in because it just makes it cleaner, makes everything sound better along the way. 48 volts phantom power. If the interface you're looking at does not have 48 volts, I would just recommend not getting it. I know that's a little harsh, but like 50% of the microphones on the market need 48 volt phantom power, and so I think you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you don't have something that can supply that. So one thing that you do want to note about 48 volt, certain interfaces like the Scarlett 18i20, they link their 48 volt. So the only two options on here are like phantom on off for 1 through 4 and phantom on off for 5 through 8. So if you record with a lot of ribbon mics like the Royer 121, you're going to want to be really careful getting something like the Focusrite, because you can press one button and send phantom down and destroy 4 ribbon mics all at once. Please don't do that. So that's just one thing to note. Most interfaces are separate, but this one in particular, they're linked together. Just things to note, you know, take a look at those phantom controls if that's relevant to you. Phase flip. Not a lot of interfaces have this on deck, but I think it's super handy, especially if you're doing drums or multiple mic sources. It basically just 180s the phase of whatever you've put in there. So if you have like a snare top and a snare bottom mic, you know, you can flip the phase on one of them and it helps it to sound a little better going in and all of that kind of thing. Finally, and this last one's just fun, I like it, does the interface provide any sort of color? So, you know, Focusrite has that famous air setting that'll give you like a little top end boost. The SSL12 has the legacy 4K button, which makes it sound a little bit more like the preamp, like the OG SSL 4000 preamp. Adds a little bit of harmonic saturation and like a high mid bump. So things like that are really fun and can offer an additional tonal shaping to an otherwise flat recording response. But that's all for me. Let me know down in the comments if there are certain considerations that you also look for in your interfaces. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I will have links to all of these interfaces down below if you want to check them out. I think they're great, but there's also other great ones out on the market that I did not mention and don't have here. So definitely weigh out all your options and find what's best for you. Thanks again for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.